I am sitting in my cozy little house that I worked so hard to buy, staring at a text from my mom about my sister Stephanie selling her house for a 3-month European vacation. That familiar knot in my stomach tells me this is not going to end well. In my family, Stephanie's terrible decisions somehow always become my problem to solve. Before we dive into this story, I would love to know where you are watching from. Please hit that like button and subscribe, because this story will show you why sometimes you have to learn to say no to your own family, even when it breaks your heart. Growing up, Stephanie was always the golden child in our family. 3 years older than me, she had this magical ability to charm her way out of any trouble while I learned early that I could only count on myself. When Stephanie was 18 and crashed Dad's car into a mailbox during one of her late-night adventures, 15-year-old me ended up working extra shifts at the local diner to help pay for repairs, because Stephanie was just a kid who made a mistake. Meanwhile, when I got a B+ instead of an A in calculus, I was grounded for 2 weeks because I was not living up to my potential. The double standard was so obvious that even our neighbors noticed, but pointing it out only earned me lectures about being jealous of my sister's free spirit. By the time I graduated high school, I had already mastered the art of self-reliance. While Stephanie flitted from one college major to another, funded entirely by our parents, I worked my way through accounting school with scholarships and part-time jobs. I learned to budget every penny to save for what I wanted, and to never expect anyone to bail me out of my mistakes. Now at 32, I have built a life I am genuinely proud of. My job as a senior accountant at a mid-sized firm pays well enough for me to afford my modest 2-bedroom house in the suburbs. It is nothing fancy, just a small ranch-style home with a tiny garden where I grow tomatoes and herbs, but it is mine. Every mortgage payment reminds me of how far I have come from that teenager working double shifts to fix someone else's mistakes. Stephanie, on the other hand, married Marcus 5 years ago, a man whose biggest accomplishment seems to be his ability to avoid steady employment, while maintaining an impressive collection of get-rich-quick schemes. Together, they bought a sprawling 4-bedroom house with a swimming pool in an expensive neighborhood, financing it with loans that made my accountant brain scream in terror. Their house was always filled with the latest gadgets, designer furniture, and expensive toys for their 2 children, 8-year-old Emma and 6-year-old Dylan. Stephanie loved posting Instagram photos of their perfect life, complete with family vacations to Disney World and expensive birthday parties that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. But I knew the numbers did not add up. Marcus had been unemployed for 8 months, claiming he was waiting for the right opportunity, while Stephanie worked part-time at a boutique that paid barely above minimum wage. Yet somehow they maintained their lifestyle, and I had a sinking suspicion that our parents were quietly funding their excess. Last month, Stephanie called me with breathless excitement about her latest investment opportunity. She had discovered what she called a once-in-a-lifetime chance to sell their house at the peak of the market and use the proceeds for an extended European vacation that would change their perspective on life and help Marcus network with international investors. I tried to inject some reality into the conversation, asking about basic concerns like where they would live when they returned and what schools the children would attend. Stephanie cut me off with that familiar dismissive laugh and said, "You just do not understand anything about real investment, Clarissa. This is about building our future, not just paying bills like some kind of robot." The plan, as she explained it with the confidence of someone who had never faced real consequences, was to spend 3 months touring Europe, staying in luxury hotels, eating at the finest restaurants, and attending exclusive networking events, where Marcus would supposedly make connections with wealthy entrepreneurs. They would return with enough business contacts and life experience to start their own consulting firm. As she talked, I found myself doing mental calculations. Even with a good sale price on their house, 3 months of the lifestyle she was describing would consume most, if not all, of their equity. When I gently suggested they might want to save some money for a down payment on their next home, Stephanie's voice turned cold. "I expected my own sister to be supportive," she said. "Instead, you sound just like those people who never take risks and then wonder why they never achieve anything extraordinary." Within weeks of their departure, Stephanie's Instagram became a non-stop parade of excess that made my stomach churn. Photos of champagne breakfasts overlooking the Seine, shopping sprees on the Champs-Élysées, and dinners at restaurants where a single meal cost more than I spent on groceries in a month. Marcus posted pictures of himself in expensive suits at various business meetings in hotel bars that looked more like parties than professional networking events. The children who should have been in school were dragged from museum to museum and landmark to landmark. Stephanie posted photos of them looking exhausted in front of the Colosseum, with captions about how they were getting a real education through travel and learning about life beyond the classroom walls. My accountant brain could not help but keep a running tally. Conservative estimates put their spending at over $10,000 in just the first month, and they still had 8 weeks left. Designer handbags from Milan, custom-tailored clothing from London, and a collection of expensive watches that Marcus claimed were investment pieces appeared regularly in their social media posts. By the 6th week of their trip, I noticed the posts becoming slightly less frequent and the restaurants looking slightly less expensive. But Stephanie maintained her cheerful facade, posting inspirational quotes about living life to the fullest and investing in experiences over possessions. That is when the phone calls from my parents started. The first call came on a Tuesday evening while I was cooking dinner in my quiet kitchen. Mom's voice had that carefully controlled tone she used when she was trying not to panic. "I just wanted to check in about Stephanie's trip," she said casually, as if we regularly discussed my sister's European adventures. "It sounds like they are having such wonderful experiences." "It looks expensive," I replied, stirring my pasta and waiting for the real reason for her call. "Well, young people should enjoy themselves while they can." Dad's voice chimed in from the background. He had apparently been listening on speakerphone. "Stephanie is still young and needs guidance about financial planning." There it was. The subtle suggestion that Stephanie's reckless spending was somehow a forgivable character flaw rather than a series of deliberate choices made by a 35-year-old woman with 2 children. "She might need some family support when they get back." Mom continued, her voice getting slightly higher with nervousness. "You know how hard it can be to get back on your feet after a big life change." I gripped the phone tighter, recognizing the familiar pattern of manipulation. First, they would minimize Stephanie's responsibility. Then they would appeal to family loyalty. Finally, they would make their request seem reasonable and temporary. "What kind of support?" I asked, though I already suspected where this conversation was heading. "Oh, nothing major." Dad jumped in with forced cheerfulness. "Maybe just a place to stay for a few weeks while they figure out their next steps. You have that nice house with an extra bedroom, and it would just be temporary until they find something permanent." The second call came a week later with more urgent undertones. Mom's carefully controlled facade was beginning to crack, as she revealed that Stephanie had called crying about Marcus's business investment in Italy. Apparently, he had met some entrepreneurs at an expensive bar in Rome who convinced him to invest $30,000 in what turned out to be a completely fraudulent startup. Those terrible people took advantage of Marcus's trusting nature. Mom said, her voice shaking with indignation. He was just trying to secure a better future for his family. I wanted to point out that Marcus had just handed over $30,000 to strangers he met in a bar, but I knew from experience that logic would not penetrate the wall of denial my parents had built around Stephanie's family. "They are being so brave about it," Dad added. "Not once have they asked us for money or complained about their situation. They are just trying to make the best of things." The third call came a week after that, and this time there was no pretense of casual conversation. Mom was crying before she even finished saying hello. "They are almost out of money," she sobbed. "Those poor babies are going to be homeless when they get back. How can we let our grandchildren suffer because of one bad decision? I should have known they would just show up." On a rainy Thursday evening, I pulled into my driveway after a particularly long day at work and saw Dad's familiar blue pickup truck parked in front of my house. My heart sank as I realized that the back was loaded with suitcases and boxes. Through my living room window, I could see the silhouettes of 6 people crammed into my small space. My parents, Stephanie, Marcus, and the 2 children were sitting among piles of luggage like refugees from their own bad decisions. Stephanie launched herself at me the moment I walked through the front door, wrapping me in an enthusiastic hug that smelled of expensive European perfume. "Surprise. We decided to come back early to spend some quality time with family," she announced with the kind of forced brightness that people use when they are pretending everything is fine. Marcus stood behind her with a sheepish grin, looking like a man who had spent the last 3 months learning that real-life consequences actually exist. The trip was amazing, but there is nothing like being home with the people who matter most. Emma and Dylan sat quietly on my couch, looking exhausted and confused. These children had been pulled out of school for 3 months, dragged across Europe like accessories to their parents' midlife crisis, and now they were sitting in their aunt's living room with no idea where they would sleep tonight. "We have arranged everything," Mom said quickly, her voice bright with artificial cheer. "Stephanie and the family will just stay here temporarily while they get back on their feet. It is the perfect solution." I stared at my family, feeling that familiar surge of anger and helplessness that had defined so much of my childhood. They had made decisions without consulting me, assumed I would comply with their plans, and once again expected me to solve problems I had not created. "Can we talk privately?" I asked my parents, gesturing toward the kitchen. In the relative privacy of my small kitchen, Dad immediately went on the offensive. "Before you say anything, this is just temporary. A few months at most, just until they can find a new place and get Marcus back to work." "I do not have space for 6 people," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "This is a 2-bedroom house. Where exactly do you expect everyone to sleep?" "You have a living room and that extra bedroom you use as an office," Mom replied, as if she had already worked out the logistics of turning my home into a refugee camp. "Families make sacrifices for each other, Clarissa." "I have been making sacrifices for Stephanie my entire life," I said, my voice getting louder despite my efforts to stay calm. "When does it end?" Stephanie appeared in the kitchen doorway, her eyes red with tears that looked suspiciously well-timed. "I cannot believe you are being so selfish right now. I just need a little help getting back on my feet." "You had feet," I snapped. "You had a house equity and opportunities. You chose to spend it all on a 3-month vacation instead of planning for your future." "That was not a vacation. It was an investment in our family's growth and Marcus's career development." Stephanie shot back, her voice rising to match mine. Marcus stumbled into the kitchen, clearly having used alcohol to cope with whatever conversation was happening in my living room. In his drunken state, he became unexpectedly honest. "Look, we screwed up, okay? We thought we could make it work, but we spent way more than we planned, and then that investment thing fell through, and now we have basically nothing left." Stephanie whirled on him with fury. "Marcus, shut up. You are making us sound irresponsible." "We are irresponsible," he continued with the brutal honesty of the intoxicated. "We spent almost all the money from the house in 2 months the kids have not been to school in forever, and we do not have anywhere else to go." The kitchen fell silent except for the sound of Mom crying and Dad clearing his throat uncomfortably. "I knew you would take care of us," Stephanie said quietly, looking directly at me. "You do not have kids, you do not have a husband. What else are you going to do with all your space and money?" That sentence hit me like a physical blow. The assumption that my life had less value because I had chosen different priorities, the casual dismissal of everything I had worked for, and the expectation that I would sacrifice my stability for their mistakes. "Get out," I said quietly. "Clarissa, do not be dramatic," Dad started. "Get out!" I shouted, my voice echoing through my small house. "All of you get out of my house right now." The explosion of anger that followed was ugly and loud. Dad called me selfish and ungrateful. Mom sobbed about family loyalty and the children's welfare. Stephanie accused me of being jealous of her adventurous spirit and said I was destroying our family over money. But I stood firm in my small kitchen, my hands shaking with rage, and something else, something that felt remarkably like freedom. "I am not responsible for your choices anymore," I said, my voice steady despite my shaking hands. "You are all adults who made adult decisions, and now you get to live with adult consequences." They packed up their suitcases and boxes in angry silence, muttering insults and threats about cutting me out of their lives forever. The children looked scared and confused as they were herded back into Dad's truck with their belongings. As I watched the taillights disappear down my street, I stood alone in my living room and felt something I had never experienced before in my relationship with my family: complete and total peace. The first few weeks after the confrontation were harder than I expected. Despite feeling relieved, I also struggled with guilt that had been programmed into me since childhood. Was I really being selfish? Did I owe my family unconditional support regardless of their choices? Had I destroyed relationships that could never be repaired? My best friend Jessica came over 2 days after the incident and found me sitting in my garden staring at my tomato plants and second-guessing every decision I had made. "You did the right thing," she said firmly, settling into the lawn chair beside me. "What they did was manipulative and unfair, and you should not feel guilty for refusing to enable their irresponsible behavior." Jessica had watched my family dynamics for years and had often expressed amazement at how my parents consistently favored Stephanie, despite her pattern of poor choices. Having an outside perspective helped me realize that what felt normal to me was actually deeply dysfunctional. I started seeing a therapist, Dr. Martinez, who specialized in family dynamics and boundary setting. Through our sessions, I learned terms like parentification and family scapegoat that helped me understand patterns I had lived with my entire life without questioning. "You were trained from childhood to be the responsible one who fixes everyone else's problems," Dr. Martinez explained during one of our sessions. "That is not your job, and it never was." 2 weeks after our confrontation, I heard through Jessica that Stephanie and her family were staying with her friend Amanda, who lived in a 3-bedroom apartment across town. Amanda called Jessica to complain about how Stephanie left messes everywhere expected to be fed without contributing to groceries, and made no effort to look for work or housing. Stephanie continued posting on social media, but her tone had shifted dramatically. Instead of inspirational quotes about adventure, she now shared memes about how real friends support each other through difficult times, and posted vague complaints about family members who abandon you when you need them most. Marcus, finally faced with genuine consequences, managed to find part-time work at a fast food restaurant. It was not glamorous, but it was honest work that brought in some income. The children were enrolled in a public school near Amanda's apartment, though they were significantly behind academically after missing 3 months of education. Meanwhile, I discovered aspects of myself that had been buried under decades of family obligation. I started taking painting classes on Saturday mornings and found that I had a natural talent for watercolor landscapes. My small garden became a source of genuine joy as I experimented with growing different vegetables and herbs. For the first time in my adult life, I used my money on things I wanted instead of things I felt obligated to provide. I bought new furniture for my living room, upgraded my kitchen appliances, and even planned a modest vacation to visit national parks out west. 3 months after our confrontation, Mom called me. Her voice was different, smaller, somehow lacking the confident manipulation I had grown accustomed to. "I owe you an apology," she said quietly. "Your father and I have been talking, and we realize we have not been fair to you over the years." She explained that watching Stephanie struggle to live independently had opened their eyes to how much they had enabled her irresponsible behavior. Stephanie had already worn out her welcome with Amanda and was now staying with another friend, burning through relationships as quickly as she had burned through money. "We always thought we were helping her by supporting her choices," Mom continued. "But we see now that we were just making it easier for her to avoid growing up." Dad had started attending Al-Anon meetings not because anyone in our family had drinking problems, but because the program helped families of people with addictive behaviors, and he was beginning to understand that Stephanie's relationship with money and responsibility was not healthy. Stephanie herself eventually called, though. It took almost 4 months. She had found a full-time job at an accounting firm, ironically, and had enrolled in community college classes to improve her bookkeeping skills. Marcus was working 2 part-time jobs, and they had found a small apartment they could afford. "I was angry at you for a long time," she admitted during our conversation. "But I realize now that you were the only person who ever told me the truth about my choices." We met for coffee the following weekend, and I was struck by how different she seemed. The entitled confidence had been replaced by something more genuine, more grounded. She looked tired, but also more present than I had seen her in years. "I never learned how to fail," she said, stirring sugar into her coffee. "Mom and Dad always swooped in to fix things before I had to face real consequences. You were the first person who ever let me hit rock bottom." She apologized for the assumptions she had made about my life, for taking my help for granted, and for the cruel things she had said about my choices. It was not a complete transformation, but it was a beginning. Our family dinners resumed eventually, but with new rules and boundaries that I insisted on maintaining. Stephanie could not ask me for money, our parents could not volunteer my resources without my permission, and family loyalty would never again be used as a weapon to manipulate my decisions. The most important thing I learned through this experience was that saying no to the people you love is not the same as not loving them. In fact, sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's self-destructive choices and allow them to learn from natural consequences. I also discovered that the fear of being disowned by your family loses its power when you realize that conditional love based on your willingness to be exploited was never really love at all. My house is still small and modest. My life is still simple and quiet, but it is completely and authentically mine. I wake up each morning knowing that every choice I make is based on my own values and priorities, not on someone else's emergency or poor planning. Sometimes the best thing you can do for someone is not to rescue them, but to let them learn how to rescue themselves. And sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is refuse to set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm, even when that someone is family. Have you ever had to set boundaries with family members who expected you to solve their problems? How do you balance family loyalty with personal responsibility? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and do not forget to like this video if it resonated with you. Subscribe for more stories about finding strength in difficult family situations, and share this with anyone who might need to hear that it is okay to say no. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let the people you care about face the consequences of their own choices. Take care of yourselves out there.